Hi, everybody. Some of you may know me from the chat and the online Q&A. um, I'm Jessica Barnes, and I'm a professor at Kent State. I've been with Design Incubation now for 3 years, I think, 2021. And I'm co-chair and director of research initiatives.
Hey everyone, I'm Heather Snyder-Quinn. I'm a professor at DePaul University in Chicago. I actually can't remember when I officially started with DI, but I think what's interesting with Silas talking about lineages and things like that is I met Eris when she came to VCFA, which is where I went to grad school, where Silas was my advisor, and she gave a really great talk about writing and just her process. And it was through that that I went to my first DI colloquium, which I called something else in that funny social media picture that Liz had. And I got to know the group, and Robin and Eris and Dan and Liz, they were all so welcoming. I felt like I could be new and I could be vulnerable and I could learn a lot. And so it just was a great vibe, very humble, very accessible. And so then I hosted a colloquium at DePaul, which was really fun, and lots of people had a lot of great momentum, and then have since been chair and director of Design Futures and working with Jess on our Designing Your Research agenda. So yeah, it's been really wonderful. I'm happy to be here and connect with everybody that's here today. Happy 10 years.
And one quick thing, what Heather mentioned, Heather and I have been organizing the Designing Your Research Agenda series for a couple of years now, and our next one is going to be Friday, November 8th. If you want to mark your calendars, save the date. We'll have 3 panelists talk about their research agendas, and there's a Q&A as part of that too. So, and it's virtual.
Yeah, and I think just to, as Jess and I have been building that series, we're trying to be very mindful of finding lesser known voices, people in earlier stages of their careers. So if you're really wanting to share your work, share your practice, no matter what phase or what type of school you're at, please reach out to us because we are open to that as well. Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Kyla Palucci, and I'm an assistant professor of graphic design at St. John's University. And today I'll be presenting a personal project, which is a type design project that embraces outside influences and personal narrative. So my story begins in 2020 when the creative work at my day job started to get outsourced to outside agencies. And I also felt that the immediacy of everything that I was making evoked a sense of nothingness. So I couldn't quit my job, and like many other creators who were going stir crazy during the pandemic, I made a ton of Instagram stories. Even though these were a big hit with my small circle of friends, I wanted to take on the work of telling a more durational and interconnected story. So like many non-New Yorkers during the pandemic, I had the luxury of returning to my hometown after weekly pleas from my family. And wanting to tough it out alone started to feel selfish, and being home meant I could be fed really nice meals like the one you see here with my dad on Federal Hill in Providence. So back at home, I spent my days doing work at the same desk that spurred my adolescent interest in web design until I came across a stark connection with my grandfather, Federico. So Freddie, as he was called, was the first graphic designer that I knew. He was a solitary World War II veteran and Italian immigrant, and he found his self-expression in art and written words. So this is a photo that I took of him when I was in college, standing in front of one of his many handmade yard signs. It displays a loose translation from the King James Bible, and I'm just going to read it out loud. Leaders and future leaders, what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and himself is destroyed or lost? Others see what you do, but God sees why you do it. There's an interesting use of punctuation here. Gutenberg dashes for spaces, a couple of question marks, and the sign itself is made with a handful of humble materials that he likely thrifted from past projects. And the sign ended up being very catalytic in my decision to further my education and go to grad school to earn an MFA. After my grandfather returned from the war, he was a factory worker at Brown and Sharp in Providence, Rhode Island, which was a manufacturing company known for making precision tools. He worked there until the labor strike in the early 80s, which was one of our country's largest to date. And it came in the wake of unemployment and the company's international outsourcing and expansion. This is him later on in life. He worked as a custodian at the local high school and crafted sign art out of his garage. Each sign featured crude letters drafted with a box cutter and electrical tape, which was a thoughtful material that could endure the tumultuous weather of the Northeast. This is one of my favorite photos. He was unmatched when it came to long signs that declared political allegiances. His entire yard was filled with different signs that catered to his own ideologies. I also really love this image. Don't know if you can see it quite here, but he started to create this underlying grid for himself. So while rehabilitating from corporate workflows, I spent my days in the basement digitizing the original font specimen, and I made a portfolio piece in case something like this might help me get hired for a better job. And I started to edit its form based on my assumptions of popular taste. I also created reels on Instagram because I was comfortable with that to increase my viewership and my process. I fashioned polls for my friends and followers to help me decide on which uppercase G to go with. And then finally, my very trustworthy college roommate stepped in to comment, if you're making a font about tape, why not just do it in tape? So I was now tasked with exploring this material in real life rather than trying to translate these experiences from a digital workbench. I learned that tape enables diverse constructions across various contexts. And as a tool for type design, characters are engineered rather than drawn, which enables quick reconfiguration and layering for expanded weights and styles. So type design has become more accessible over the years. It was very easy for me to scan in my analog work and refine it in glyphs by way of type design videos that I found on Skillshare. My result was quirky and fun, but I hadn't really considered its applied future beyond my personal use. After I completed my MFA thesis at also VCFA, I decided that my final document would be typeset in the result of this part of the process. So my graduate studies followed my curiosity of how ethnographic approaches to design can enrich commercial outcomes. The materials used when creating work can reflect relational experiences and unveil new visual languages for future applications. I turned out an entirely different second style that mimicked all the things that I liked about working on the computer and everything that honored my grandfather's practice. I also started to discover a happy medium between the two that felt very practical for what I wanted to use it for. So Federico Text is an imperfect but readable sans serif that caters to the design tools I use on a daily basis. Here I drafted out the letter forms by the segments as opposed to the full letter form itself, so I could edit it and edit different characters for readability. This also made the typeface flexible for future iterations if I want to continue to build upon it or make italics. There are also skeuomorphic moments where I sliced away points of the tape shapes using the Pathfinder tool to mimic the use of an X-Acto blade or a tear, which I felt was essential to its voice. And then I also built out the previous analog version to act as a display font that works best in the context of strong, bold statements and playing nice with others at small sizes. Tape is an inexpensive material and it seems to be admired by a lot of designers. Every time I give this presentation, someone tells me about an experience they have with using tape. My use of it is one of many recipes, of course, and my grandfather used it to manifest abundance despite his own economic poverty, laying the groundwork for the principles I was raised by. These are some photos of my family. So I continue to post about my relationship with tape fonts and any kind of design work created from humble tools and materials. Friends from all over send me every tape font specimen that they spot. And I've since discovered a constellation of underrepresented narratives through this creative research. So Federico is still under construction as I expand the family, serving not only as a typeface, it's a system that connects me to my roots as a designer by embracing accessible methods of communication while adapting to modern tools and technologies. Thank you.
Hello all, my name is Matthew Flores and I am the Graphic Design Fellow at the School of Design, University of Tennessee, Knoxville. My presentation today will explore the first phase of my experimental practice that attempts to bridge the gap between radio and graphic design, finding methods by which invisible sound waves can become manifest in visual artifacts and vice versa. In particular, this body of work is focusing on so-called fuzzy radio modes, Hellschreiber, radiofax, and slow-scan television, and appropriates these largely obsolete methods of transmitting visual information into tools for graphic experimentation and expression. So let's take a quick tour through these technologies in order to understand their visual idiosyncrasies. The oldest is Hellschreiber, a method of sending text by radio invented in 1929. Through Hellschreiber, letter forms are divided into smaller pieces and then sent digitally as a series of on-off tones similar to Morse code. The word Hellschreiber translates to bright writing or clear writing and was originally used to transmit text to newspaper bureaus in the years before and during World War II. Hellschreiber was supplanted by teletype and was very nearly extinct by the 1990s before it saw a revival by computer and radio enthusiasts. Radiofax, in contrast, allows for the transmission of monochrome images via radio waves. Developed primarily as a method for disseminating photographs and negatives more quickly than through the post, several newspapers experimented with radiofax as a way to deliver a print edition over AM radio. Today, it's most often used as a tool for transmitting weather charts and maps to remote ships without internet access, although Kyoto News in Japan continues to broadcast complete daily newspapers in both Japanese and in English. A single edition can take up to 8 hours to broadcast. Radiofax was in turn mostly phased out in favor of slow-scan television, which allows for color images and a much faster transmission time, 10 seconds to a few minutes per frame. This 256 by 320 wide pixel format is still popular with ham radio operators today. However, it was most famously used to broadcast video from the first moonwalk in July 1969. So a goal of this project is not to fetishize obsolete technology, but rather to find ways to adopt their methods of dissemination and use their graphic traits and quirks to complicate how we generate design and ultimately use design as a vehicle for communication. To that end, each of these methods provides a specific opportunity to examine both how we use technology to design and how that technology alters the meaning of the resulting message. For example, Hellschreiber, being a text-only mode, exposes the convention of representing language visually, and how this act of filtering text through technology can introduce miscommunication, artifact, and misunderstanding. So in this first experiment, I transmitted misheard lyrics from the band Kiss. And in this example, I performed a duet with two handheld radios, transmitting the text of the Abbott and Costello comedy routine, Who's On First? I then translated the result into print form, making physical my original disembodied performance. I do think it's worth pointing out the sense of failure and futility built into this process. By limiting myself to relatively weak transmitters and only using obscure modes, even to amateur radio operators, I often have this sense of sending messages in a bottle, so to speak, with doomed transmissions to no one in particular. It's a process that actually lends itself nicely to thinking through the limits of how we're able to communicate and the necessary gap between intent and interpretation. Nim Chimpsky was a chimpanzee raised by researchers to test animal language acquisition and non-human communication. Using American Sign Language, Nim was able to string together sentences. His longest was, give orange me, give eat orange, me eat orange, give me eat orange, give me you. Scientists are still today divided on whether this represents actual acquired language or if Nim was simply mimicking the signs of his handlers. Thinking through the limits of technology, radio fax in particular is quite slow compared to more contemporary, familiar, and largely instantaneous forms of sending and receiving information. This 8 by 10 inch image took just over 24 minutes to transmit in full, for example. In comparison to sending a text or an email over cell service, which is itself a form of radio propagation, radio fax is slow, it's cumbersome, and it's susceptible to distortion, poor reception, and static. Ultimately, I find this a valuable part of the process, actually, as noise and artifact highlight the literal and conceptual distance between broadcast and reception, and the act of transmission becomes a collaborative conversation between designer, medium, and viewer. As Maria Papadimoulis, a member of the feminist radio group Shortwave Collective, puts it, radio is about fragility, vulnerability, exploration, experimentation, failure with bold letters, failing to receive and transmit sometimes. It's about being bold with using technologies that you're not comfortable with. Acknowledging the friction inherent in using technology reminds us of the importance of the human element in this transaction. Framing this process as a conversation largely between the user and the medium calls into question where exactly failure ultimately falls. So in this experiment, I make a daily ritual of failure, each morning transmitting one frame of Evel Knievel's 1967 jump over the fountain in front of Caesar's Palace Casino. Fully broadcasting the 24-second video in this manner will ultimately take a little over 2 calendar years. So at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned the fact that these technologies are considered quote-unquote fuzzy modes. This term was coined by radio operator and writer Murray Greenman to articulate the fact that these formats employ digital transmission but human-readable reception. Humans today navigate a digital world using an analog toolbox of sense and perception, a fact made complicated when most contemporary methods of communication are intended to be read, interpreted, and translated by a computer. Unlike, say, the long list of coded values that represent the color and brightness of any given pixel in a JPEG, for instance, fuzzy modes result in images that need no decoding once the message is received. These modes, then, exist in the gap between digital and analog, machine and brain, and leverage technology for transport but rely on a human user for interpretation. Because of this fact, fuzzy modes function less like a set of visual and sonic codes and more like a language, one that gently shifts our focus away from the content of the message and toward the matter of how we communicate with one another through technology. As Eduardo Cott writes, the aesthetics of telecommunications operates the necessary move from pictorial representation to communicational experience. Ultimately, transmitting visual information via fuzzy radio mode is full of contradiction. It's non-visual by nature, yet produces a very particular graphic aesthetic. It's immaterial, yet reception is bound by a specific physical space. It's obsolete and niche, yet it creates an opportunity to interrogate our interaction with the digital world of today. Because of this unique position, I propose that adopting fuzzy modes as a tool for graphic production can refocus our relationship to digital interfaces and underscores the importance of human perception when communication is necessarily mediated through technology. Thank you.
Am I showing yours on video? Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Doi Chung, an assistant professor of graphic design at Oakland University in Michigan. I am here to talk about my ongoing project and its theoretical framework. The project aims to create a digital archive to revitalize Detroit's vernacular visual language. This digital archive will preserve historical signages, making them accessible to everyone. To ground the project's framework for symbolism in urban landscapes, I revisit the book Learning from Las Vegas by Scott Brown, Ventry, and their teaching assistant Stephen Eisenhower. The first edition of this book is designed by Muriel Cooper, the head designer at MIT Press at that time. This seminar research was emerged during a research studio for graduate students at Yale School of Art and Architecture in 1968. The authors of the book and their 13 students took a 10 days of a study trip to Las Vegas to examine its commercial strip characterized by mega-scale signages, eclectic architectural forms, and highways. They used Las Vegas as a case study to explore the importance of symbolism and communication in urban space. They believe that the building should speak to their users and reflect cultural and societal values. Gothic cathedrals are highlighted for their use of the mixed media to convey religious and cultural messages. These structures use a tradition of iconography in which painting, sculpture, and graphics were combined to tell stories and symbolize spiritual beliefs. Las Vegas is a modern counterpart to Rome and Gothic Cathedral, demonstrating how commercial urban environment can also be rich in symbolism. The authors argue that the various signs, billboards, and themes building on the Las Vegas Strip serve as symbolism rooted in commercialism and popular culture. The city's urban landscape is designed to capture attention and convey messages quickly and effectively, often through exaggerated and eclectic forms. I found their investigation of Las Vegas' urban landscape particularly interesting. Like Detroit, the city was significantly shaped by the development of automobiles and highways. It has fundamentally influenced its visual and spatial organization. Both cities' landscapes were developed along the roadside because interaction is by car and highway. The two photos we are looking at here, Las Vegas Strip in 1967 and Detroit's Woodward Avenue in 1965, show the relationship between automobiles and signages as key elements of urban design and architecture. Like Venturi and his colleagues investigated on Las Vegas Strip, my project, the Digital Archive, puts a primary focus on signages found in the Central Commercial District in Detroit. The downtown Detroit, the area in red indicates major business district. You can also see general commercial districts are located on around the major roads such as Woodward Avenue, Michigan Avenue, and Jefferson Avenue. Not surprisingly, commercial area shows the most traffic pattern. Although it's a city with a rich history in the automobile industry, Detroit has experienced significant infrastructural challenges and urban decay due to the decentralization of automobile industry since 1900. The series of figure ground drawings began to show holes in the physical fabric of the city after 1950s. Buildings were left completely empty, vacant housing lots increased, abandoned lots turned into parking lots. Some neighborhoods were razed to build freeways under name of urban renewal. Accordingly, the once thriving industrial vernacular and signages that shaped Detroit's urban landscape disappeared into its history. The symbolism in signages is significant because it serves as historical artifacts that provide insights into the past, illustrating how businesses communicated and what imagery and messages resonated with people. Two photographs we are looking at here shows various signages in Black Bottom, a predominantly Black neighborhood previously located in the east side of Detroit. In the 1950s and 1960s, the city of Detroit demolished the Black Bottom neighborhood to make the Chrysler Freeway. Hastings Street, which once boasted the largest concentration of Black-owned businesses in the city, along with its internationally renowned music culture, was completely erased. Now, nearly 40% of land used downtown Detroit is dedicated to parking lot. These are views from Farmer Street in 1910 and 2023. The area with small businesses and institutions on the left photo turned into public parking lot. This is street view of Woodward Avenue, the north side of Detroit. Most of the signages are gone by 2018. In addition, the traditional reliance on physical street signs has diminished with GPS platform and self-driving car equipped with LiDAR technology. However, digital space suggests a new opportunity to transfer the lost vernacular language of the past into digital archive accessible by any users. While Ventry and his colleagues' focus was on Las Vegas in the 1960s, my project extends their idea into the present day, where technological advancement continually redefine our experience of urban spaces. Similar to their study on various elements of the buildings that form the vernacular language of Las Vegas urban landscape, my project also involves analyzing various elements to define each photograph of the artifacts that I am archiving. Categorizing filters for the growing database seemed a logical point to start with. The digital archive involves 8 categories including material, style, structure, industry, time, collection, street, link to source. Through my collecting process, I added additional filters as necessary and extended the range of date for artifacts. Now I want to showcase the database that will be included in the digital archive. The project still in a developing process, this database is going to be used to create a map-based search engine, which will be the primary function of the digital archive. The most of the artifacts were pulled from collections of 7 local libraries and organizations. In conclusion, I believe this digital archive supports to preserve and revitalize Detroit's vernacular visual language. By recognizing the importance of these visual artifacts and leveraging modern technology, we can ensure that the city's rich heritage remains an integral part of the future trajectory. Thank you for listening, and I am happy to answer any question you may have. You can reach me at doichang@oakland.edu for any inquiry or follow-up discussion.
All right, thank you and good day. My name is Javier Viramontes, visiting lecturer at RIT and founder of Format, a design consultancy with a research-based approach whose aim is creating design that is both subjectively meaningful and formally timeless. I'm also accompanied by my research assistant.
That's me. I'm Roblyn Powley. I'm a MFA student at Rochester Institute of Technology in the Visual Communication Design program.
I want to say we have to thank her because she's in Paris and she's here doing this instead. So.
Thank you.
The title of this talk is taken from an exhibition I curated at the University of New Haven of historically significant Swiss posters from the private collection of Tom Strong. The exhibition was aimed at deepening both the practical and historical education of design students with a deeply immersive material experience. The gallery was accessible to students, becoming an active workspace where students were able to copy, transform, and combine new works based on these timeless exemplars. The exhibition title outlines methodology of using archives to engage design history, not as a static memory, but rather as part of a continuous lived experience, allowing students to visit history through the lens of their own formal and conceptual interests. In dealing with historical artifacts, however, we come into the concept of heterotopias, a term coined by Michel Foucault from his essay of other spaces, utopias and heterotopias. The term is best explained as a territory that both invites and excludes at the same time. Examples included honeymoon suites, libraries, museums, and in our case, archives and private collections. Heterotopias are a dilemma, both spatially and pedagogically. As spaces within spaces, these territories can provide a challenge that might, which include being off limits to students, requiring special training. Students might also lack the knowledge of their existence, which is most likely the case, or students might bar themselves from entry by feelings of inadequacy. My personal experience with such spaces began over a decade ago at the Rob Roy Kelly American Wood Type Museum at UT Austin. This open access working museum provided me with an infinitely valuable experience which allowed me to ask, was history a magisterial thing? Is it something to contend with, remix, or experiment with? Along with fellow typographic aficionados Aham Growie and Lauren Dickens, we were able to touch visual worlds we had never seen. With an entirely naive spirit, we proposed to Professor David Shields, the then former custodian of the collection, that we would print type specimens of the various faces within the collection. The open access model provided encouragement to experiment, commit mistakes, and come up with strategies to amend those mistakes. The outcome of the exhibition was titled Fully Justified Mistakes, where printing mishaps turned into playful typographic experiments that contrasted the rigid specimen format. All learning begins through emulation or copying. So foreign was this visual world, reversed in contrast and wildly exaggerated, that the most sensible conclusion for me to understand this was to digitize one of the typefaces called Aldine Expanded, which is what you see there. The result was published through a type foundry called Lost Type Co-op, which was a pay what you want foundry model. I think they're still operating, I believe. The translation from movable type to open type yielded the addition of new possibilities such as language support in the form of diacritics, extending the utility of this original archival object to something of broader cultural utility. However, the opportunity to expand this digitization came this past semester or year with the help of my research assistant, Robin Powley, and her interest in RIT's graphic arts collection, which is completely awesome. It contains 45,000 volumes and over 130 archival collections of graphic communication, including a large holding of wood type specimens. In figuring out a research project for her, we decided we would combine the notion of historical type revivals with Garrett Nordside's ideas of contrast for interpolation. Aldine Expanded, like many of the 19th century wood faces, lacked any formal categorization. These sort of faces had multiple copies, different optical sizes. They even had a lot of dupes. Each instance we found would become a master within a variable font.
So this is where I come into this process, and I knew that my two goals were research and digitization, but I wasn't exactly sure what that was going to mean from a practical standpoint because I had never neither drafted a font nor done actual archival research. So I started my process by connecting with Amelia Hugo Fontanelle. She's the associate curator at the Cary Archive at RIT. And she was able to pre-pull a number of specimens from the collection that were likely to have examples of Aldine, its predecessors, and other variants. So I went to the archive and physically examined the specimens, photographed them for reference, and recorded the details in a database, including name, manufacturer, source page number, approximate date. And that database is still evolving. So the Cary Archive holds high resolution digital images of many, if not all, of the specimens. However, I found that the physical process of searching through the collection allowed me to consider each example more closely and helped me to kind of begin to build my own visual understanding of Aldine. Once I had collected the information on a variety of specimens, I reviewed those examples to determine a starting point for digitization. Since many of the specimens don't include full sets of glyphs, I focused my attention on specimens containing full upper and lowercase sets, as well as those that included figures and some punctuation. So the biggest challenge that I've found in the drafting process has really been the subjective part of recreating historical artifacts. Even the highest resolution images are still images of an imperfect manufacture and printing process. So each letter of each specimen presented a series of decisions that were an attempt to balance the original intent of the letter form, the physical imperfections of the specimen, and the project goal of a usable functional revival of Aldine in its many iterations. So once I had digitized one full set of uppercase characters, I was able to compare these to Javier's existing drafted expanded examples, and then begin a secondary process of assessment to bring the technical drafting elements in line with one another for compatibility, and then further analyzing the letter forms in comparison with one another. Overall, the project has allowed me to gain a greater familiarity with the types of archival resources that are available and how to best approach them with doing research. Moving forward, I'm going to continue my research on this project, both in the Cary collection and hopefully in partnership with some other institutions. And then the process of drafting and refining each specimen will continue as we continue to build the final Aldine variable font.
Combining compatible masters across a design space is quite a unique challenge. This problem provides an opportunity for something unique to emerge. Here we can see there we go. Here we can see master accompanied with an extrapolation with extreme contrast. So we've stepped away from the archival object into something that does not quite exist into this historical context. A heterotopia is perhaps something too obvious. It's a natural process of understanding, of gaining increasing ownership through the lens of learning. But educators and students can both follow a powerful, simple triad of copying, combining, and transforming as a means of navigating both the known past and the future unknown. Thank you.
Okay, so we have time for a question. I want to make sure that I'm going to ask a question to each of the 4 panelists that we just saw presentations from. I'm going to start with Kyla, but I will need you to come over here since it looks like this is our only mic working.
This one.
Yes. So we love the connection to your personal history and the history of your family. And as much as your project has to do with the crafting of the font itself, this collection of images that you're receiving from friends or that you might be collecting seems to be like an interesting place of thinking about collection of this genre of font. So I was wondering if this is something that you have considered as an archive for the future that that almost creates this very specific curated type of images.
Yeah, I think that this kind of culminated as like an MFA thesis at first, but now as I continue to work on it or look back at the research, what's starting to happen is that it goes beyond the tape fonts and it goes into more about like just the untrained designer as well. So I'm kind of interested in not only collecting specimens that people send me, and I do have like an arena board of a bunch of these images, because who doesn't at this point, but also like it's led to me kind of researching other artists that are in New York City or people who make signs by any means necessary.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move forward to the next and then we're going to come back around if anyone has further questions. I'm going to continue with Matthew and his fuzzy modes, which were fascinating to hear about and maybe very new to many here. So the question for you is, first, can you tell us about your research process and how you get your hands on these tools, and how do you see your next phases for experimentation with these fuzzy modes?
Yeah, totally. So in terms of process, a lot of the workflow is going from, I guess I should say it sort of depends on the mode, right? So the first example I showed is a kind of a text only mode. So I have a piece of software that I can kind of input text into, and then it generates the sound, which is a lot like dial-up internet. It sounds a lot like that kind of modulated audio. And then I can plug in my little handheld radio that will actually do the transmitting. So it depends on the process where it's either, kind of text directly, or otherwise I can kind of generate PNGs or JPEGs to then plug into the same software. But at the end of the day, the transmission is kind of the most important thing. So it goes like from my computer to the radio and then kind of out into the world, right? Which is why I mentioned the kind of message in a bottle aspect of it, because it's not like you can flip your car radio to these bands, right? So it's pretty obscure in terms of who can actually receive the message, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to poke at. But it's more or less computer to then radio. In terms of sort of next steps of experimentation, I'm on deck for a special topics class kind of on this research next spring. So I'm really curious to see how I can start bringing this kind of technology and way of thinking to like students for whom like dial-up internet or like a fax machine is a totally alien concept, right? Because I think that is going to be a really interesting way to break through the kind of looking back at this old technology aspect and see how we can start bringing it into 2024, 2025 and beyond. So using that kind of like practice process as research to then point forward to see how, again, like these radio modes can tell us more about how we think and talk and work and communicate digitally kind of more generally.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm going to continue with the other two presenters, and then we can come back and ask questions. So I'm going to call Doji over here. Okay, so the question that I wanted to ask you is if you can tell us a little bit more about your process of building your database. Has this been a team effort? Have you had support through your institution, maybe through the library or digital collections, or external funding? If you can tell us a little bit more how your project is set up.
Oh yeah, so this is still so I'm still in process of developing this database and map-based platform as well. Mostly it has been my own work. It was very demanding because I actually had to reach out to 7 different organizations and libraries, and but it was most likely like a typical process of research project. So I got help from librarians and archivists, and their help was wonderful. They are really knowledgeable and well known about the Detroit archive. And actually, it was impressive to see the amount of the archive they have. I mean, the collection they have, but it was not super organized in a way. And especially the Black Bottom neighbor, I was kind of shocked because they didn't really have information about those photos, or like,
so you created the metadata from scratch.
And in the Detroit Historical Museum's first floor, I mean the basement, there's actual, they took the facade of the one of the stores in Black Bottom neighborhood and make a almost like fake theme park style basement, and they don't have any information about this store.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a big process of cataloging.
Yeah, cataloging. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's possible to collect all those details data because it was all gone. But yeah, I think it's still meaningful to identify the location and time of those photographic archive. I mean, photographic artifacts.
Okay. Thank you. So I think I saw a question that is for Javier and Robin from Silas. So instead of asking my question, let's ask your question. So Silas wonders how your collaborative researchers, typographers, type designers, and educators might have shifted since you have done this project you shared. Is there such a thing as interpolated typographic education? let's continue. I'm thinking of balancing the technological craft and skill and the conceptual.
Awesome. Robin, would you like to take a stab at it?
I think I'll let you handle it. This is your brainchild, Javier. I mean, I can certainly speak a little bit to the shift, like a personal shift in terms of this research project. It was all new for me. You know, I was in my second semester of my first year of grad school, right? So doing things that I haven't done before, and I'm still very much in like, I want to devour the world and everything is interesting and anything I can learn is exciting and better. So Javier had this project in mind and suggested it. I was fully on board and now I'm going to continue it, which if you'd asked me 3 months ago, right, like I would not have said that I was going to be working on drafting type this summer and into the fall. I'm shifting it into an independent study personally so I can continue some of the work myself. And Javier is
Currently, you're doing the type at Paris.
yeah, right now, I'm in Paris, not specifically for this reason, but while I was here, I came to the Type Paris Now 24 conference. So like, yeah, it's amazing. A fantastic group of presentations the other day too. So I'm really like sucking it all in right now. But I think some of the bigger like educational questions are really, Javier can touch to those, but like this has been super meaningful and transformational personally. Totally.
I think, let me see if I get this question. I think I've always seen design through sort of the Vignelli model, which is semantics, syntactics, and pragmatics, which really means meaning, form, and basically does it work in the real world. So I think those, maybe it's like my simplistic brain that likes to comprehend things in threes. Copy, transform, combine, this semiotic relationship as well. So I think that's the approach that I take in teaching. But as far as, I think teaching is an extrapolation, to be honest. If you think of the family as model, you emulate to some degree what your parents did, and you continue to iterate upon what that is. And in teaching, you do the same thing. You take what you learned, get rid of what made you hate your soul, and then add whatever experience you want to contribute to the world. So.
Okay, I want to ask the audience virtually or here if they have
follow-up question just before he gets back to
yeah, of course.
So you don't have to keep wandering back and forth. So I don't know if they'll be able to hear my question.
I can paraphrase, but you can go ahead and ask.
Okay, apparently this don't work.
No, they don't work for the Zoom.
Yeah. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your work with archives and students at RIT and just what it's like for students, whether graduate or undergraduate, to go and see artifacts in person as opposed to maybe, well, now seeing them on our Instagram or on social media or on Pinterest or something, but just that ability to see the materials in person. And full disclosure, I'm an RIT grad, so that's actually how I started writing and research is in those places. So I just, it's been so many years, so now I'd love to hear kind of your take on it today.
Okay, before you answer, Aris is asking Javier about his involvement with the archives, like real archives, physical space, and students working there in this era where we, have access to these many other repositories of images, especially digital images. So what?
I think I identified that term heterotopia because it really, as wonderful as these resources are, I think there's a huge problem of access. Access doesn't have to be a political thing. It's just a physical reality of existence. And I listed 3 things. It's, the same student, the resources, the staffing. I think the RIT Carey collection follows this radical librarian model, which they do everything they can humanly and supernaturally to accommodate people. Unfortunately, there are other places which, just through the political realities can't. For example, if you try to go to the very amazing Blue Balance Center, there's a guy there, he'll stop you, they'll ask you for an ID. And I think that's centric to like this physical location. There's a lot of transit and whatnot. The UT Austin program had the Robert Kelly collection, and that had its own weird political things. Our students couldn't go, but design students could go. And then the other thing is educators. There is so much pressure. I have a 4-4 load right now. And so when am I ever gonna step into an archive? I don't know. So there's many things involved in access, but it takes the educator initiative to put people in those situations.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone in the two places? Go ahead. Yeah. You want to step over here so people can see. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for all of your presentations. My question is for Matthew, though. So while I was watching your presentation, I was wondering if you had thought at all about how to, or if you're going to use this research to kind of work with your students on how they're interpreting information that's coming at them through technology. One of the things that I noticed in your presentation, I think maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the interpretations were like incorrect. So it kind of made me think of like misinformation or disinformation. And that's a very clear way to recognize that, but it's a little bit more hidden with the technology we have now. So I was just wondering if you had thought about that connection.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for the question. I think of it kind of in two ways. The first is, and I talked about this in the video a little bit, but like how long it takes and the immediacy that we're used to is kind of taken away from you. So thinking about how that aspect, especially with visual communication, how that can give us a way to think through like sort of a delayed response between a message I make and then how a viewer might interpret it, right? But also exactly to your point, that idea of miscommunication, I think is really interesting because it forefronts the fact that kind of no matter what we make in whatever medium or whatever form, there's always going to be a difference between kind of what we mean and what gets read, right? And one thing I like about these modes is that they really kind of bring that to the surface and they really make us think about like, oh, how can I frame a message or a piece of design or kind of any part of communication to be sort of as direct with the knowledge that it's going to fail to some degree, right? And I think that kind of human aspect is what it comes back around to in a way that we don't think enough about, perhaps, when we're texting and sending DMs and emails and that kind of stuff. So I think, yeah, kind of the time delay, but then also the, excuse the pun, fuzziness of communication are two things that are really important to be thinking about with students.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Javier is coming.
I have a question for Silas. In the Latin American context, there's this term called colorismo, which makes it difficult to navigate, I guess, racial boundaries. Are there limits to a black grid? Or like, what are the outer limits of
Forward and easy.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that term before, but like it resonates. I think it's interesting. I think I'm discovering that. I think that's part of what's interesting about the term is it's like one that I'm like creating and like interpolating. And I feel like I think the limits are like maybe sort of questions of like, what do my own explorations say about kind of like the dominant sort of structures that I was given? And so I think that's interesting to like take an investigation from or against something, which might be an interesting limit. And maybe there's a different way of like framing it instead of like, I think about this a lot in like design history, that a lot of times like part of what I needed to do as a historian was like to find stories that like were never given to me. And so the context of institutions and schools, you talked about access, which also really resonates with me. And so I'm also wondering, like, is that the only way to frame it, like as an oppositional act? And so that's maybe something I've just been thinking about in terms of like limitations or limits. And I think the longer that I work with it, I actually like that it can also be something that's open-ended. I feel like grids also can have that kind of function of like permutation or like investigation where you discover something new or something could be added on to it later. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
What is our pending time, Liz?
We have like 10 minutes.
Okay, do we have any further questions from anyone here? Or anyone there? Yes.
So, hi everyone. I just have a question and was hoping Matthew could talk a little bit about his role as a design fellow, because it's something that we see in a lot of other disciplines being hosted by various institutions, and it's still relatively rare in design. And so I guess this is me thinking that we should have probably more of you with this role, but I wanted that's just in my head. So I wanted to hear whether that maps onto your own experience, or if that, I'm just creating an imaginary world here. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for your question. I can speak to kind of how we have it set up at UT, where it's a 2-year fellowship, where really it's focused purely on kind of teaching and research, right? So a 3-3 load with kind of a research responsibility. I don't have to worry about any of the like departmental or committee kind of work that would normally come with a faculty role, right? So we have it geared very much towards kind of early career educators. We're in the College of Architecture with the architects and the landscape architects and the interior designers, and we kind of rotate through each of the schools having 2 fellows at a time. So it's a really good way to like kind of beef up your creds in a lot of ways. And I didn't anticipate this going in, but it feels a lot like going back to graduate school in a certain way, because it really allows you to focus on kind of your research, but also getting the reps in the classroom as well, and kind of developing the pedagogy part of your practice as well. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it'd be great to see more institutions having the kind of flexibility and resources to open up these kind of roles, I think, because it really I think provides a more flexible way for folks to become established in the field beyond just kind of coming in as an associate or a lecturer or whatever. So yeah, I think like it'd be great to see more. I understand the realities of why they do tend to be kind of rare in terms of, who can offer them. But I just finished my first year and it's been really fruitful and productive as far as getting a good foothold. So.
There's another part to the question. I mean, it's called a fellowship, but it comes with a salary?
Yes, totally. Yeah. I'm at the lecturer level. So in most aspects, I'm essentially a lecturer, just with some different responsibilities as far as where my workload falls.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, any other final questions for our panelists today?
Is it okay if I make a comment?
Of course.
I invite, many of these projects and papers and research inquiries to consider next year's Communication Design Educators Awards. And please enter your work so that it can be judged by a jury of your peers and, possibly awarded national distinction. So give it some thought.
Yes, I was actually going to say those, just that very thing. We should be launching the awards soon. So think about entering, think about your colleagues' work and recommending that they enter them. Nominating your colleagues' work. Sometimes people don't realize that they're doing interesting work. They're kind of working in their own little bubble, and that's kind of how a few people have won in the past, is just through nominations. So please watch out for that. We've got it. So just to remind you of some other activities. So we are going to Boston University in October
25th.
October 25th. That has the submissions have closed now, but it's going to be, we're getting back to like we were prior to the pandemic, but we're still, integrating what we've learned from the pandemic. So it's going to be in-person event. So if you're interested, please come to Boston for that weekend. So there's the awards. We've got Design Your Research Agenda on November the 8th. Is that right?
Yeah.
On November the 8th.
Yeah, with a public school focus this time, with an early career person all the way to a full professor. Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. And then the abstract writing workshop in January, and then we will be at CAA in February here in New York. So you can start thinking about submitting. We actually have it already open. So if you're ready to submit for February, you can start to do that now.
Can I say something too, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, I want to plant a seed. So we